Buonasera, mi preme dare il benvenuto a tutti loro per questa bella serata, così come si presenta, della presentazione pubblica di questo libro impegnativo curato dalla nostra professoressa Yvonne Zudona, che ringrazio per averci coinvolto in questa presentazione e per il lavoro che fa per la nostra facoltà da tanti anni. Mi trovo qui, mi presento Roberto Regoli, un collega di Yvonne, direttore del Dipartimento di Storia della Chiesa, e porto i saluti anche del padre decano Marek Inglot. Questo libro ci sta a cuore perché non è un'opera in solitaria della professoressa Yvonne Zudona, ma è un'opera condivisa con gli studenti, un modo di condividere il pensare insieme intorno a un soggetto, pop art, come dice il titolo, che vede in profondo legame il Papa, i papi, l'arte contemporanea, i legami di vicinanza e di lontananza, il cammino fatto nel tempo. Questo libro lo presentiamo in questo contesto che vede presenti i colleghi, studenti autori, studenti amici. Ringrazio particolarmente coloro che in questa serata si sono resi disponibili a presentare il volume. Innanzitutto qui con noi la professoressa Marta Michelacci, a cui do il benvenuto, che è una docente di storia dell'arte, che ha tante pubblicazioni al suo attivo che vanno dal restauro alla conservazione dei beni culturali fino a pubblicazioni che hanno a che fare col piano urbanistico, più ampio chiaramente. Gli ospiti che interverranno stasera daranno contributi da diverse angolature. Avremo la specialista adesso nella storia dell'arte, i teologi, gli altri accademici, poi ne presenteremo gradualmente, per vedere un aspetto che sta molto a cuore alla professoressa Dona, che è quello della interdisciplinarietà, della capacità del dialogo tra le diverse discipline e scienze per raccontare, descrivere e capire anche lo stesso oggetto che contemporaneamente uno è molteplice secondo le angolature. Quindi a lei, professoressa Michelacci, la gratitudine per aver accettato l'invito e con interesse vogliamo sentirla. Grazie di essere qui.
Un grazie enorme intanto per l'invito, che ritengo un onore grandissimo, cioè quello di poter essere qui stasera con voi e di poter esaminare questo testo veramente molto interessante che ho letto con grande piacere, perché va a toccare argomenti che sono di mio interesse specifico, no? E devo dire che mi sono addentrata in queste pagine proprio con quello spirito un po' che è quello dei bambini, no? Quello dell'essere sempre incantati di fronte a ciò che di nuovo viene visto, riscoperto attraverso comunque una osservazione, un attento studio come quello che è stato fatto in questo testo. E la professoressa Dona Schlobitten ha il merito di aver aperto un grande campo di lavoro, che è quello appunto che va a toccare questo tema scottante anche per il nostro presente, perché riguarda un tema che è delicato, importante, l'arte e la sua declinazione, diciamo così, la sacralità dell'arte, perché entrando in queste pagine, ma anche nella definizione stessa di sacralità, possiamo già entrare in una questione abbastanza interessante, perché come in queste pagine si citano padre Couturier, padre Regamey, la questione è che già all'inizio, nella prima metà del Novecento, la questione se l'arte è tutta sacra è stata affrontata, cioè l'arte per definizione in sé è sacra perché è l'atto dell'artista creatore. Questo è uno dei punti. E questo testo è veramente molto interessante perché nella prima parte del testo si comincia dicendo che non si tratta di un discorso sull'arte sacra contemporanea, ma di una relazione tra la vita religiosa cristiana, il pensare religioso cristiano e la religiosità dell'opera durante i pontificati moderni. E quindi vuole offrire uno sguardo introduttivo su quella competenza disciplinare che è necessaria per capire questo argomento. Quindi in queste pagine si cerca di creare una sensibilità riguardo alla conoscenza dell'arte ed è una raccolta delle tesi, delle migliori tesi seguite dalla professoressa Donna Schlobitten e che hanno come pregio quello di, come spesso la professoressa fa, perché io la conosco da un po' di anni, quella di avere questa grande capacità di valorizzare il lavoro dei suoi studenti. Questo mi sembra doveroso doverlo sottolineare. Noi abbiamo fatto un'esperienza molto bella a Colonia un po' di anni fa e abbiamo lavorato con un gruppo di artisti ma anche di studenti e questa modalità, questa metodologia di valorizzazione innanzitutto di uno studio che può essere quello fatto da studenti che poi vengono valorizzati nel corso del loro lavoro, mi sembra di grande valore. Anch'io sono docente e guardo sempre con grande ammirazione questo modo di agire educativo, didattico che porta alla valorizzazione anche cioè che porta alla valorizzazione proprio del lavoro di studio degli studenti. E quindi comunque il tema di fondo del testo è appunto questo divorzio tra arte e chiesa, così come l'aveva descritto già Paul Claudel. È innegabile, va bene se parlo troppo veloce? No, va bene. È innegabile che l'arte sia sempre stata una spina nel fianco per la Chiesa. E già appunto negli anni con il sillabo di Pio IX c'è stata poi la condanna del modernismo con il decreto Lamentabili, con l'enciclica Pascendi che erano di Papa Pio X. Quindi la Chiesa ha avuto un grande problema con l'arte e in queste pagine trapelano da queste pagine tante osservazioni in merito a questo tema. E diciamo che appunto in questo passaggio che va nel 1910 la Chiesa aveva introdotto un giuramento antimoderno in cui era necessario ripudiare in certo modo il modernismo perché era veramente una sfida per il pensiero dell'epoca, no? E questo totale cambiamento di prospettiva è avvenuto in tempi più recenti con, ecco qui si esaminano per esempio si esamina l'atteggiamento di Giovanni XXIII e la realizzazione per esempio della Porta della Morte, quindi il suo profondo rapporto che era anche di amicizia con Giacomo Manzù. Quindi la esecuzione della porta della Basilica di San Pietro e anche questa lunga e faticosa elaborazione viene fuori in una delle tesi, una tesi molto interessante, quella che si occupa proprio di questo rapporto tra il Papa e la realizzazione delle porte ed entra nello specifico di questo dialogo tra un Papa e un artista e lì la mediazione anche di De Luca, questo sacerdote illuminato con queste grandi capacità, con queste grandi aperture verso l'arte, verso gli artisti, E appunto in queste pagine si coglie questa dimensione, questa capacità della Chiesa di accogliere un artista come Manzù, molto libero da ogni schema, libero da qualsiasi condizionamento di qualsiasi tipo, no? Nelle pagine, scorrendo, io vi faccio una presentazione generale. Certamente uno dei punti dei vertici toccati nel dialogo tra l'arte e gli artisti è quello toccato da Paolo VI. E Paolo VI, io arrivo da Milano e conosco un po' le esperienze che Paolo VI ha vissuto quando a Milano incontrava, prima di essere Papa, incontrava gli artisti del suo tempo. Il rapporto con artisti come Scorzelli, come Fazzini, ci sono tanti artisti che hanno lavorato, Messina, hanno lavorato a stretto contatto col Papa, e questo era col futuro Papa, e questo è stato frutto di un lungo percorso di Paolo VI. E a mio avviso questo ci deve insegnare una prassi. Paolo VI da giovanissimo, negli anni 1928, aveva compiuto un viaggio, aveva visto i luoghi della rinascita cristiana, mi riferisco a Béron, a Maria Laach, aveva visitato questi centri e lì si era accorto come l'arte aveva avuto un ruolo importantissimo per la rinascita cristiana dell'Europa. Che il Papa avesse capito così precocemente cioè l'importanza dell'arte anche soprattutto per per entrare nel vivo della cristianità, per poter ridare nuova luce, nuovo smalto anche alla dimensione religiosa, è assolutamente un punto importante. E tutti i suoi scritti, quelli sull'arte sacra futura e gli scritti che poi saranno poi anche importanti proprio per la sua storia, anche il contributo che ha dato all'arte sacra e a questo tema dell'arte, cioè è stato importantissimo per tutti noi. Naturalmente tutti ricordiamo il discorso, l'incontro con gli artisti nella Cappella Sistina, quello del 7 maggio del 1964, e il peso che ha avuto l'inaugurazione della collezione di arte religiosa moderna che è nei Musei Vaticani, che ha aperto poi un destino che ancora oggi manifesta la sua potenza, no? Perché se noi pensiamo a cosa sono oggi i Musei Vaticani, con questo arricchimento di opere che è arrivato proprio dall'introduzione della collezione di Paolo VI, cioè noi abbiamo veramente davanti a noi una figura straordinaria. Nel considerare quello che i papi successivi, come lo stesso Papa Wojtyła, che adesso appunto chiamerei Santo Papa Wojtyła, ma è la dimensione che Papa Wojtyła ha dato dell'arte, di questa autonomia dell'arte, lui punta molto su questa questione, su questo concetto dell'autonomia della cultura e dell'arte. E anche questo un passo notevole, importante, che trapela anche dalle pagine appunto di questo testo, anche perché il Papa, per esempio, Giovanni Paolo II analizza le cause dell'allontanamento reciproco tra la cultura e il cristianesimo e tra la Chiesa e l'arte, e quindi queste sono le questioni che interessano nel contesto di questa serata. Papa Benedetto XVI tocca il tema della via della bellezza, della vera bellezza, e anche qui questa tesi che viene affrontata con questo specifico questa specifica volontà di evidenziare questo contributo dato da Papa Benedetto XVI mi sembra di grandissimo valore. Ripercorrendo queste pagine, io mi sono presa alcuni appunti, ho visto come effettivamente ci sia questa enorme come dire, apertura in questo senso. Benedetto XVI nel parlare della bellezza della via pulcritudinis arriva a dire e a esemplificare come anche il concetto stesso di bellezza che per secoli ha per noi significato la bellezza greca-romana, la bellezza classica, in realtà Benedetto XVI la vede incarnata nel Gesù crocifisso. E questa è una enorme prospettiva. Cioè la bellezza così come Benedetto XVI concepisce è proprio quella che emana il Cristo sofferente. E da qui nel testo viene evidenziata la parabola di William Condon. E queste pagine sono per me di grande bellezza, di grande rilevanza, perché effettivamente mostrano come un artista che ha una storia anche molto particolare, un artista che a un certo punto si converte, c'è tutto un processo di conversione, però che concepisce e comprende come questo, come dopo i fatti accaduti durante la Seconda Guerra Mondiale, dopo una Shoah, dopo quello che è accaduto, non so, dopo le leggi razziali del 1938, se pensiamo a quello che la storia ci ha riservato, non è più possibile guardare alla bellezza con i canoni estetici del mondo greco. È una bellezza che deve passare necessariamente dal Cristo crocifisso. In questo senso anche la musica per Benedetto XVI è un'esperienza trasformante, un'esperienza che porta a vedere come la liturgia sia al centro di un processo che ha una dimensione estetica che porta ad una trasformazione reale. Sono molto belle quelle pagine in cui si parla della liturgia come trasformazione, alla quale fanno eco le parole di Romano Guardini quando dice che la liturgia è un gioco, c'è un congiocare, c'è una dimensione che ha come obiettivo quello della trasformazione, di questa percezione di una dimensione estetica che ti trasforma dal di dentro. Ecco, queste sono le suggestioni che io ho colto leggendo queste pagine. Non ho voluto citare i singoli curatori, ecco, perché la professoressa Donna ha fatto un'introduzione e all'interno sono inserite ci sono pagine molto belle, quelle su Matisse, c'è un'analisi dell'opera di Rodolfo Papa, sono raccolte anche riflessioni profonde sul pensiero di Paolo VI, sui papi, ecco. Ma lascio a voi la scoperta, come si dice nel linguaggio, come dire, non bisogna, i giovani dicono non bisogna spoilerare troppo, no? Perché vi togliamo la possibilità di scoprire da soli che cosa c'è in queste pagine. Per quanto mi riguarda, io qui ho fatto una sintesi naturalmente e perdonatemi se sono stata forse non esaustiva, ma ho cercato di almeno presentare nell'insieme il testo, quindi ne sottolineo il grande valore. Nello stesso tempo è una questione questa dell'arte e del confronto con gli artisti che mi tocca quotidianamente, e perché appunto mi sono occupata di queste tematiche E anzi ho voluto indagare nella mia esperienza, per esempio, ho scritto un testo che ha come titolo Icone del Sacro, in cui mi sono occupata dell'arte di soggetto religioso e ho dato anche un'occhiata, ho fatto un giro anche un po' in Europa, ho cercato un po' anche di capire cosa succedeva nella Chiesa riformata, poi sono andata anche un po' a vedere cosa succedeva nella Chiesa anglicana e anche un po' nella Chiesa africana per fare qualche sondaggio e non tanto per dare risposte, esprimere giudizi, tantomeno moralizzanti o meno, ma ho visto che cioè la questione delle immagini è una questione profonda, cioè quindi da questo testo si può anche andare ad aprire il problema a tutto tondo. Perché la questione delle immagini è così importante? Perché oggi tutto passa attraverso le immagini. Il nostro mondo, quello nostro quotidiano, è un mondo di immagini. Noi siamo bombardati di immagini quotidianamente attraverso i social, attraverso internet, attraverso Instagram, eccetera. Ma come io qui voglio gettare un sassolino, a volte può succedere che appunto la Chiesa con grande intelligenza in altri tempi aveva posto al centro dell'interesse la questione delle immagini e per esempio anche nella stagione della Controriforma, nelle affermazioni del Cardinal Paleotti, Giglio da Fabriano, Molanus, Ottonelli, la questione delle immagini che dovevano essere controllate assolutamente, e quindi anche qui il tema è scottante perché l'arte per definizione non può essere sottoposta ad un controllo così serrato, ma questo tema sul potere delle immagini oggi ci interroga ancora di più perché gli studi neuroscientifici, per esempio, hanno evidenziato come le immagini agiscono a livello neuronale sull'intelletto, eccetera. E alcuni studiosi si sono chiesti quali sono queste problematiche, per esempio dell'agency, della cultura visuale. Addirittura uno studioso americano che è Mitchell si occupa ha definito iconic turn, questa svolta iconica. E Monsignor Capanni, che attualmente è nella Pontificia Commissione per i beni culturali della Chiesa, in una rivista che è Arte Cristiana aveva scritto che occorre che la Chiesa si documenti sulla cultura visuale e se ne potrebbero ricavare delle indicazioni utili per la catechesi, per la liturgia, eccetera. Allora, questa è una domanda che possiamo anche fare stasera in questo contesto, no? Questo potere delle immagini, questa possibilità che le immagini hanno, anche in funzione mistagogica, perché questo ci interessa fortemente, come funziona un'opera d'arte anche a livello visuale, ci può aiutare nell'unione con Dio? Ci può aiutare un'immagine inserita in un contesto religioso a pregare? Questa potrebbe essere una domanda che volentieri vorrei fare per poter poi sentire anche le diverse opinioni. Forse anche il tempo a mia disposizione è scaduto, giusto? Sì? E quindi lascio questa domanda sul tavolo e vi ringrazio per l'attenzione.
Grazie dottoressa Michelacci per il suo intervento che ci ha fatto attraversare il volume dandoci gusti diversi. Mentre lei parlava, professoressa, mi veniva in mente l'aula a nostro fianco dove c'è un grande crocifisso un po' inquietante nei colori, nel tratto, tipico di quegli anni, no? Dopoguerra, sicuramente del pontificato di Paolo VI come stile che riprende, che rappresenta proprio quello che lei diceva poc'anzi. E l'ultima domanda che lei ha posto ci apre già all'intervento di chi la seguirà, che forse potrà dare una risposta o potrà rilanciare anche la domanda, perché avremo il piacere di poter ascoltare il professore padre Jim Corkery, gesuita, professore ordinario nella facoltà di teologia, con competenze tanto nella teologia fondamentale che nella teologia dogmatica, e che ha studiato autori che sono stati citati dalla stessa professoressa poc'anzi, tanto Guardini, tanto che il pensiero di Ratzinger, che poi divenuto Papa ha dato un suo contributo, come abbiamo sentito poc'anzi. Allora, professore, siamo curiosi di sentire la sua lettura e forse anche la sua reazione al precedente intervento. Grazie per essere con noi di nuovo.
Va bene qui, mi sento un po' più a casa in piedi perché da 33 anni insegno e prima del Covid sempre in piedi, ma recentemente nel cockpit. Io chiamo questa situazione che abbiamo qui adesso un cockpit. Si sente un po' con un pilota, con le scherme, etc. You can hear from my Italian that it's not elegant. I have only been speaking Italian for 8 years, but I've been speaking English for 68 years, and I'm a bit better at it. So if you don't mind, I'll speak in English, but not in a very accented Irish English, because I teach in an international university, because over time I have been neutralized by the Jesuits and by the various places and by the various audiences to whom I have spoken. So anyway, this wonderful book, my devotion to it is shown alone in the fact that I carried it from home to here. It is not light, Yvonne. This wonderful book has an ample subtitle, Esperienza, religiosa, estetica e spiritualità, towards a theology of the theory and criticism of contemporary art. It is the word theology that explains my presence here. I don't have competence either in the history of art nor in contemporary art. But I've had an interest now for many years in the modern papacy, let's say from Julius II onwards, and especially in how the popes have exercised different roles at different times and in different ways. In this book, Professor Yvonne squeezed a short preface out of me, and in that preface I wrote that a little over 10 years ago I co-edited with an American Jesuit colleague, Tom Worcester, a book on the modern papacy from Julius II onwards that explored the popes of the modern era in 3 roles: Italian prince, patron of the arts, and universal pastor. Now, at one time or another in history, in different contexts and because of different political and social conditions, one role was more important than the other 2. But we can say that all 3 were exercised. The exercises of the role were always influenced by different aspects of the societies and the times in which the particular popes lived, and also, in terms of being patrons of the arts, by the presence, availability, and the relationships of the popes with the artists at the time, sometimes very tense and difficult, sometimes warm and friendly. All of this is very ably shown by Professor Donna Schlobitten in the introduction to the book, in which she also says, I quote, "I papi del passato non partivano da una specifica teologia dell'arte per valorizzarla." Tom Worcester and I, in our inferior book, did not explore very much these different theologies, and we interested ourselves more at the particular times and in particular popes on what caused them to assume one role more than the others. You remember that since the loss of the Papal States, I'm not suggesting you were alive then, but in 1870, when the Pope lost his temporal power fully and finally, he turned more fully to being pastor, Leo XIII to being teacher. In a way, popes did what it was possible to do at any given time. They seized the opportunity. We looked more at how they exercised those roles, but we didn't look very much at the particular theologies of art of the particular popes. So I welcome the advance in this book to considering the relationship between the theological vision of the Pope and the Church, the life of the Pope himself, and the form of expression of art at the time. This relationship calls for a look, uno sguardo sul tutto. Pope art focuses on relationships more than the book I was working on did, showing how they varied through history, from divorce to amicizia, between church, artists, and Pope. Hence, in this book, the importance that is given to context and the decision of the book in its various contributions, I quote, to partire innanzitutto dall'opera d'arte che I papi hanno commissionato in uno specifico contesto storico. I feel that by quoting a bit from the book in Italian, I'm giving something back from having stolen in English. As well as context, importance was also given to the specific Christian perspective of each of the popes. To put it simply, after the popes got friendly, after John the 23rd and up through Paul the VI, John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis now, the popes nevertheless made distinctive contributions that are analyzed somewhat in the introduction at the beginning of the book. The book permits that also, and the writers of the different parts are permitted to follow the interests and the particularities of each era. In this, I detect three important things. First, that the method of the book is more inductive than deductive. Second, it has a respect for the freedom of each particular writer in his or her specific context in investigating the relationship between any particular pope and art. And thirdly, taking the book as a whole, in its encouraged diversity, it is encouraged to maintain its diversity. It exemplifies a way of thinking that is similar to what is described by Pope Francis in Veritatis Gaudium about the necessity for interdisciplinarity and indeed transdisciplinarity, which is his third criterion of 4, acting as a foundation for a renewal of Christian studies, of ecclesiastical studies today. The Pope sees this as occurring under the broad and ample light of revelation, but he thinks that it's important that the entirety of knowledge is embraced, allowed to be itself in its different departments, and at the same time, the foundation in revelation being noticed. So you see, transdisciplinarity is a kind of buzzword for the method of Pope Francis and the method of the book. Professor Yvonne Donner-Schlobitten also arrives at transdisciplinarity in her reflections by means of a central thought of Romano Guardini about how to grasp the whole, il tutto, of St. Augustine. The aim of Guardini in his book on Augustine lies in the look, lo sguardo, that does not simply collect and gather up things in an integral sense, but proposes a transdisciplinary method to understand the whole of Augustine, that in her book, Pope Art, one can apply also to single popes and to their relation with the artist and his preferred work of art. Yvonne wishes, building on this, to explore a transdisciplinary method for this present book with its unique and particular contributions. Pope Francis, arriving at transdisciplinarity also from a basis in the thought of Romano Guardini, sees the need for this in ecclesiastical studies at the present time. So an interesting thing has happened. Yvonne Dona, with her gaze on a new and more ample, uno studio more ampio, più ampio, undertaken to explore the relationship between the church and art, between the popes and artists, conceives a new pathway, uno studio nuovo, a new study that has a wider glance. And I see the same in Pope Francis in his vision for theology. So as a theologian reading this, I am excited at the meeting of the two. Each pope in his particular context. That's what you will find when you read the book. In the introduction, Professor Yvonne concentrates on those popes who represent the time when and after the church and art, the popes and the artists, entered into a more reciprocal and fruitful relationship. In general, an appreciation of the artist in his or her own right, with all the autonomy the artist needs, is to the fore in the attitudes of recent popes. But interestingly, the book shows nonetheless that they did not think in the same way, and this is illustrated in certain particularities. Why am I making this point? It's important to me because I think it's important in the book. The book has a filo rosso, but it's not a metodo singolo, a metodo unico. It's something else that you'll see in a moment. So, John the 23rd's rapporto with the artist Giacomo Manzu, mentioned already, is one thing. The influence on Paul VI of French theology and of French art, and related to this, the influence of the ideas of certain artists, for example, Henri Matisse, on his artistic vision. Yet another perspective. John Paul II's relationship with the Orthodox Church, and his desire that the Church in the West would grow in understanding of that of the East and an appreciation of its iconographic traditions. Benedict XVI's intuition of how the authentic beauty that leads us to the truth reveals itself definitively, strangely but definitively, in the brutalized, disfigured, suffering Christ, illustrated for Benedict in Matthias Grunewald's image of the crucifixion in the altar at Isenheim. About the beauty that wounds, and particularly Benedict's recognition of being wounded by the arrow of beauty in the broken and bloodied Redeemer, manifesting the paradoxical beauty of this hideous ugliness, illustrated through the realism of the suffering Christ in the crucifixion of Grunewald. Now, you'll think I'm an expert on Grunewald if I go on, but I owe this to Hansel, who, our shared teacher, who is the author of the last chapter in the book, and of course to Yvonne Dona herself also in the introduction. And then finally, there's Francis' preference for the controversial white crucifixion of Marc Chagall, manifesting his profound interest in the encounter of the other or with the other. I think that Yvonne's allowing of the particularity of each pope's ideas to emerge regarding the relationship between the church and art, as she reflects on their discourses on this theme in the introduction to the work, and especially her bringing to life of the pope-art relationship through referring to some particular works of art preferred by individual popes. This sets the stage wonderfully, and it is at one with the contributions that will follow in the body of the book, as each writer is permitted undisturbed in the task of composing his or her own text. And so we see the manner in which the introduction to the book takes the readers through the thoughts and reflections and relations with artists of the different popes, this prefigures how the individual contributions that constitute the 6 chapters are parts of the book, may be characterized. So, does the book have a unity? I'm beginning to think it just might well have, but a different kind of unity. For all of this, as already mentioned, Ivan Dona is inspired by Romano Guardini and by what he says about St. Augustine. And it is this inspiration that sheds light on and shapes the character of all the other contributions in the book also. In these contributions, as in Ivan's own introduction, one detects the presence of lo triplice squadro of Romano Guardini. There is the work of art itself, the specific works of the particular artists that I have already mentioned. There is the observer of those works, each pope in ogni caso, and there is the creator of those works, the named artist of the time. And engagement with the pope-art relationship in various specific ways throughout the book is carried out according to this way of seeing. Lo triplice sguardo is employed. In Romano Guardini, the characteristics of this way of seeing are very different from the characteristics of the way of seeing and knowing that was typical of his world. We remember his characterization of its situation as a crisis of knowledge. And it is the same today. So other figures who are central to the book, Pope art, manifest also something, like Guardini, of a changed look, uno sguardo nuovo, in their contemplations of art. This is true of all the popes considered, from John the 23rd to Francis. Probably it's particularly evident in the final two, Benedict XVI and Francis, because I see it surfacing in Benedict's 2006 address in Regensburg and in Francis's encyclicals, particularly Laudato Si. Watch your time, they said. I'm watching my time. So first, a quick look at Benedict XVI. When he was addressing his former colleagues at the University of Regensburg in September 2006, he offered a critique of the reason, positivistic and empirical, that enjoys an almost exclusive place in societies and academies at the present time, and he challenged his hearers to a broader understanding of reason, pointing out that we will succeed in addressing the problems of our time only if reason and faith come together in a new way, if we overcome the self-imposed limitation of reason to what is empirically verifiable or falsifiable, and if we once more disclose the vast horizons of reason. I already see this as expressed also in the chapters of the book. Benedict says that the courage to engage the whole breadth of reason and not to deny any of its grandeur is the program of which a theology grounded in biblical faith enters into the debates of our time. Not a small canvas, but a large one. Benedict says, to this Logos, the Logos who is creative reason, who is love, who is at the beginning of everything that exists, to this breadth of reason, we invite our partners in the dialogue of cultures, he says, to rediscover it is the great task of the university. And this is interesting. As an academic, Benedict forgot to be Pope there while he was there, and he enjoyed again being a professor. And he was talking to the guys and the ladies, and he said, think big. Don't shrink history or social science or philosophy to what is dominated by a positivistic and limited horizon. Think big, put theology beside philosophy, rediscover the great questions for humanity and indeed for faith. So Benedict, like Romano Guardini before him, is addressing the crisis of knowledge here that he sees as marking the present age. And he's asking for a renewed look, un nuovo sguardo, that's a hard one for us, that is unafraid to engage the entire breadth of reason. This is not dissimilar to how today's book, Pope Art, offers in its turn to a method of transdisciplinarity, a new sapere, uno sguardo su tutto, an application of Guardini's Blick Christi, lo sguardo triplice, to considering the popes and the artist and their works of art together. 1, 2, 3. Uno triplice squadro. Not saying so on every page, nevertheless, this nuovo sguardo amplifies the vision of the book Pope Art in each of its parts. So this book enjoys a unity, not of method. There is, as Professor Dona says, neither a unique defined method nor a set of predetermined criteria for judging positions. But there is a singular look. It's triple, but it's shared in all the chapters. Broadly speaking, the contributions manifest application of lo sguardo triplice to their explorations together of the works of art, of the artists, and of the popes who are engaging with them. Now, I learned this quite well from Yvonne. The artist, the observer, and the work. And it's embedded in my mind now. I think it's a very rich way of articulating lo sguardo. A quick look at Pope Francis. I said that also in his writings, Guardini influence is present, and he, as he looks at lo sguardo spagliato that we have today when looking on the world, especially the created world, helps us to see also what the blick Christi, lo sguardo triplice, the threefold seeing of the world of Romano Guardini can bring. He focuses on this way of seeing, of looking, of knowing, and it's motivated by more than academic curiosity about Guardini. For him, Guardini's threefold seeing of the world offers a grounding for the kind of transdisciplinary and transcultural education that is enjoined upon us by the conditions and particularities of today. The idea is, and this was Guardini's idea too, to contribute to the crisis that is evident not only in the modes of thinking and seeing of contemporary higher education, but also in the contemporary paradigms of knowledge and habitual ways of viewing the world, Weltanschauung, that are across the world today. He speaks too of a crisis of believing and thinking. Watching the clock, I'm going to get briefer. I spent my whole life racing the clock. What Francis is doing is important here and very connected to the book, because maybe the best way to look at it is this way. He is showing us in an encyclical like Laudato Si that our problem is not just that we make individual mistakes, but we look at the whole of created reality with a fundamentally false mindset, with one that offends our relationships with one another, which allows to exist rather than dissolves Gegensätze, oppositions, and so on. So let me mention some of the characteristics of lo sguardo triplice for Francis and what he finds opposite in the way we see the world today. The characteristics of lo triplice sguardo are, first, they do not involve seeing in a way that cancels oppositions, what the Germans call Gegensätze, but rather in a manner that holds them in tension, that maintains polarity. Second, they do not involve seeing definitionally, more or less coldly from the outside, but rather they attempt to grasp to be unity, to penetrate to the real, to see il tutto. Neither do the characteristics of lo sguardo triplice involve looking in an unrelational way, remaining unaffected, but rather they have us look in a relational manner, opening up to encounter, dialogue, and relationship. They do not involve operating exclusively theoretically, nor exclusively practically, nor exclusively open to application, but rather in modo triplice, keeping theory, practice, and application together. These characteristics do not involve operating alone, autonomously, or together, heteronomously, but once again, rather in triplice, they emphasize being theonomos. And finally, the characteristics of lo sguardo triplice do not embody disengagement, remaining cold and spectator-like, but rather being contemplative, loving, and appreciative. Now, when you plunge your way into the chapters of this book, you'll see that the writers mostly get it right in terms of being on the right side of what Guardini has described. I said his characteristics of his Lo Sguardo Triplice do not involve this, and then I said 6 times, but rather. And the but rathers are all evidence in the pages of the book. The last, the contemplative, is particularly evident how Pope Francis, in his Veritatis Gaudium, approaches seeing those who have been relegated to the margins of the world. And that's very important too. Jumping again, let me just say, as Francis tries to articulate, according to the vision of Guardini, an integral ecology, he juxtaposes not wrong individual opinions, but mistaken collective assessments of the world against alternatives that would embody the Sguardo Triplice. And so Francis speaks of the technocratic paradigm. So does Benedict, writing in what he always called the second phase of technical modernity. The technocratic paradigm, a consumerist cultural paradigm, an outdated set of criteria, a mindset that fragments. These are all words that I'm taking directly from the encyclical, and in their place, Francis offers a vision, a new paradigm of interconnectedness and of the relatedness of all things. Couple of minutes? There are a couple of minutes, really there are. So we have seen that appropriating the Blick Christi of Guardini is accepting the invitation to see in a new way. This fact has become evident in the triplicate way of knowing. This knowing has its deepest roots in the Trinity and how they see what their Sguardo is on the world, thus connecting us also with St. Ignatius and what he says about them in his spiritual exercises in the meditation on the Incarnation. He pictures the 3 divine persons, 3, notice, looking on the world with love, not dissolving the oppositions, the Gegensätze that they see, not staying aloof. Their blick is not distaccato, but relational. Their Sguardo is unifying, and they contemplate il tutto. St. Ignatius speaks directly of how the 3 divine persons were looking down upon the face and circuit of the world filled with people. Their response is to this whole, and it is to redeem and save it in love. Theirs is the original and most foundational Sguardo Triplice, evident in the way the Trinity looks at the world that has fallen and is in need of redemption. Now you will say, with all my talk of Francis and Benedict and their employment of Guardini's Sguardo Triplice, that I have wandered a long way from our beloved book, Pope Art. I have not. For what we learn from these 2 popes, in their being influenced by Guardini, we see in the various contributions to Pope Art where the same influence is much in evidence. What this book, Pope Art, excitingly represents, it seemed to me as a theologian, is a new approach, a unified integral look that destroys nothing of particularity. That's very important. All the chapters maintain that. With the popes, the works of art, and the attitudes of the time, destroys nothing of particularity, while at the same time manifests a shared vision centered on what? On a common Sguardo. I have been uninclined to see continuity between Benedict and Francis, although others have pulled me up on this. Christi Atmo, a priest who recently did a doctorate here, and also Rovati, who has written on beauty in Ratzinger. The conventional wisdom says they're very different. But it seems to me, looking again, the underlying Guardini pull says they may not be quite so different. I find something similar in the way of doing the way that theology is beginning to be done in these days in the wake of Veritatis Gaudium, where a more ample look is being enjoined on those who are engaged in theology. And I'll finish with this because it's a word of appreciation from within our university. In fundamental theology, one of the departments I'm involved in, under the leader, we have tried to take integral ecology seriously as a dimension of everything that fundamental theology is doing, because fundamental theology interests itself in bringing the gospel to the world. And if the world is smothered and suffocating and can't breathe and destroying itself, somehow the integral ecology perspective has to be part of all the theology we do, all of the theology that we do. We are, in the way we do theology, looking for uno sguardo nuovo, a new paradigm. And Guardini is also an inspiration there. So I would say, in this, my work as a theologian, I find myself, it was strange when I first entered into relationship with Ivan and Hansel, because they were working together on Ratzinger, and I happened to know something about him, but it was great. And even though I stand up here making a fool of myself, talking about things I know nothing about, the stretch into another area is very fruitful. And the book, in manifesting a work done together that is united by lo sguardo, rather than a single method or a set of criteria, is an inspiration also to theology to share a common vision. One of my favorite texts in the Bible is from Isaiah 43:19, where it is said to the dejected Israelites on the shores of the river in Babylon, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not see it?" I echo those words this evening.
Ringraziamo il professor Corcheri per il suo intervento di approfondimento e di metodo legato al pensiero degli ultimi due pontefici e a Guardini come maniera di innervare il tutto. Ora abbiamo l'ultimo intervento, grazie ancora professore, l'ultimo intervento che sarà online, lo vedrete proiettato, Johannes Rauchenberger, curatore, storico dell'arte, teologo e in ultimo anche direttore del Cultum, un centro per l'arte contemporanea, l'arte e la religione a Graz. Abbiamo anche la traduzione scritta del suo intervento, la traduzione italiana che viene ora distribuita qui in aula. Ci interessa quest'altro sguardo perché completa la lettura del volume. La storica dell'arte, il teologo e chi cerca anche di creare dei ponti tra questi mondi. Interessante anche l'ultimo volume, uno dei più recenti volumi del prossimo relatore, dal titolo Fede, amore e speranza, l'arte contemporanea riflette il cristianesimo. Vediamo il contributo e lascerei la parola, non so se è in diretta già. Sir Rauchenberger, thank you. I think you can hear my voice. It's your time. Thank you for your presence.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You can talk, Professor.
First of all, I would like to apologize for not being here, for not being able to be with you live. Thank you for the honor of speaking at this book launch. Hope Arts, the wonderful book by Ivona Donash-Lobitten, presented today at the Pontifical Gregorian University, subtitled Religious Experience, Aesthetics and Spirituality. Departure for theology and theory and criticism of contemporary art. A lot has been said there, and it's impossible to underline in the form of an intervention much that Yvonne Dona has meritoriously worked out. The city of the Pope, a never-ending the city of the popes, a never-ending fascination for artists. In a city like Rome, the image of the popes is so multifaceted and dominant that that it needs a spot on the present to work out the importance of art for the image of the church. And above all, what the popes have said about it in the last few decades up until today. That is the achievement of Ivan Dona's book, and it cannot be overstated. The atmosphere of Rome, with its churches, domes, and people, is so inextricably linked to the popes that it is revealing to this day. And yet, today you do not go to Rome to study the inspiring field of contemporary art and church. Why? The gap is too great, and so is the power of history. What gap? What power of history? That would be interesting to discuss. Yvonne Dona said something about the latter in her book. I see my role on this evening as being to show you further examples from current contemporary art, how the Pope's spin art have been addressed in recent years. But before that, in order to pick out some aspects of Dona's book, I go back even further in my intervention in memory. The Sistine Chapel, next one, yeah, the Sistine Chapel and what Beauty has said about that. Rome and the arts. You cannot evade the resonating words of Renaissance Pope Sixtus IV, who reigned from 1471 to 1484, the builder of the Sistine Chapel, who spent a lot of money as a patron of great art. He said, let the people believe, let the people see the beauty. Let the people see the beauty first, and they will believe. Even though this apologetics does not wash away the stains of this Pope and the Church of this time. Of course, beauty has been seen differently in the course of time. In the city of Hope, in particular, the nudity of the trembling figures in Michelangelo lost over already a few decades after he had created his work. With its 5.5 million visitors per year, the Sistine Chapel in Rome is not only the greatest crowd puller for Rome tourists, but it is also used as a symbolical meeting place of the Pope and the artists. The first one of these meetings, Ivona Donna describes it in her book in the introduction on page 18, took place upon invitation by Paul VI in 1964, his second year as a Pope. At that time, he said, we have treated you badly, contented ourselves with surrogates, with plain imitation and cheap works of art of little value. We have gone astray, following paths on which art and beauty, but also, and this is the worst thing for us, the cult of God have been badly served. When the Pope blames the artist, one does not know what you want to say, and often you don't even know it for yourselves. And finally he asked, let it be, do we want to become friends again? I'm sorry, so it's not a deep. Do we want to become friends again? He said. 45 years later, Pope Benedict XVI invited contemporary artists to come to the Sistine Chapel in November 2009. He spoke of beauty. Beauty. You cannot avoid it. And in the affairs of faith in particular. Nevertheless, in such symbolically charged places like Rome in particular, it runs the risk of blinding out the suffering and the reality of the world, and, by the way, with the history of modernity too. At any rate, let's remember the fact that Pope Francis already received so much acclaim already in the first weeks and months, and after that years of his pontificate for his staged dedramatization of his papacy, of his office, makes you wonder. Relying on symbols, rites, images, and robes to communicate the joy of the gospel, as still exemplified by his predecessor, has by all means received with less honest sympathy than his gestures of visiting the refugees island of Lampedusa or a juvenile detention home on his first Holy Thursday in Rome. Anyway, this seems to be a public insight of the change at the Vatican of 2013 in the public perception. Musealization is a very ambivalent process at the highest level too. A fresh breeze from the south. Nevertheless, the pontificate of Benedict XVI had an important moment for our question. In this intervention, I would also like to recall these. The Pontifical Council for Culture, headed by Gianfranco Cardinal Ravasi, had launched numerous initiatives, such as the participation of the Holy See in the Venice Biennale, or the meetings of the Court of Peoples, the Cortile del Gentili. Here, the Vatican has acquired a high reputation in the secular arts scene. Especially the involvement at the Holy See at the Venice Biennale is laudable. Of course, art which could be called spiritual could be found there already a long time ago. You just needed to see it. Of course, in retrospect, the initiative for the Court of Peoples, Cortile del Gentili, was somehow a countermodel to how Pope Francis understands art. Back then, in 2009, there were still complaints that art had left the temple and that it had entered the secular streets of today. Overall, she put the stories of the Bible on a dusty shelf and became self-referential. The discussion about art must also be about looking for art there on the secular streets of today in order to transfer an impulse from Pope Francis to contemporary culture. That is actually how Vatican II described the relationship of the Church to art, for example, in Gaudium et Spes number 62. What the Abandona's book also shows, the statements of the popes on art are not to be seen in one line. Sometimes they are even contradictory. Especially Pope Paul VI and the early Pope John Paul II is characterized by a courting tone, also to secular art. With regard to the texts, an extremely positive and advertising undertone can be perceived. The official meetings of John Paul II, such as in Munich, in Vienna, or Brussels, can also be interpreted along these lines. As early as 1983, Pope John Paul II said the following words at the end. What is memorable in particular is Pope John Paul II's speech in Vienna in 1983. It ended with the following words. Behold the man. Never overlook and overhear him. The hoping, the loving, the frightened, suffering, and bleeding man. Be his advocate. Keep watch over his world, his beautiful, precarious earth. In this, you share the concerns of the church, which looks with a steadfast gaze at the one about whom Pilate said, Ecce hoc. Behold the man, Jesus Christ, the Son of God and man. He is the path to full humanity. He is also the destination. May many be blessed to recognize him in new ways, also due to you. Pope Paul's drama of our time, the break between the gospel and the culture, my fourth point. Already 40 years ago, it was also Pope who sensed that the church had to catch up pretty much in its relationship to modern culture. For this, Pope Paul XVI found, as Mrs. Donner also describes it in her introduction to Pope Art, a museum which was to be established right under the Sistine Chapel. In 1973, Pope Paul VI founded the Collezione d'Arte Religiosa Moderna of the Vatican Museums. The Pope called upon artists from all over the world to participate in this subject of the collection by donating some of their works. What does religious art look like in the present? The vision was powerful. 2 years after the museum's opening, Paul VI called it the drama of our time, the break between the gospel and culture, Evangelii Nuntiani. Those responsible for this at the time were well aware of the church's break with modern culture. Not only individuals who had applied themselves to some convergence from almost 100 years of them. But how has it been since Pope Paul VI and his collection? Since Pope John Paul II, the collection has been expanded primarily through gifts from state visits, according to Nicole Forti, the head of the collection, in an interview with the magazine Kunst und Kirche we have made 2 years ago. Do you still search in the present? Is musealization the precondition for religious art? But what is musealization? Is it insisting on past things? Is it what theologians call tradition? Is Christianity clearly coded in this respect? Is musealization a process of filtering quality? Is it a crystallization of cultural process or processes? That was the initial question for my project for a collection and a virtual book museum with 3 volumes entitled God Has No Museum, Religion in the Art of the Beginning of the 21st Century. Pope Paul II, reflections on presence as the image of religion. The media age teaches us that we need personalities to communicate content in the best possible way. This does not only go for friends, but also for politics, and last but not least for religion too. That is why I would like to add a few examples in addition to Yvonne Donner's book on Pope art and how Pope art is dealt with in contemporary art. Because the popes are also cultural greats beyond their writings, which are artistically processed even today Pope John Paul II astonished the media theorists in this respect because he knew, like hardly anyone else, how to bring back the religious image, which already seemed to be subject to musealization for a long time, to present-day image use. He knew, like hardly anybody else, how to use the power of images for his message until to his end. From 1978 to 2005, he was the omnipresent, impersonated image of religion in this world. He was like a media star that was captured by the cameras like a monolith of the late 20th century, history. After all, the Iron Curtain broke down during his pontificate. He kissed the ground in countless countries he visited, already ravaged by disease. He opened the holy door at the turn of the millennium, or put pleas for forgiveness into the cracks of the wooden wall in Jerusalem. The camera followed him wherever he went, but not like other public figures of our time with celebrating status, often seen as an instrument in the hands of paparazzi, but because he expressly wanted this, right up to his public dying in 2005. Harold Wojtyla was also often filmed and photographed when he was praying. Pictures of him praying the rosary are still for sale today. An example of this media reflection in the then omnipresent image of the Pope is the work Life After Death by the German artist duo Corpus Leffler. They had a Rome scholarship in 2005 and were fascinated by the recent appearance of the now canonized Pope John Paul II, and Corpus and Marcus Leffler attended masses, audiences, and blessings celebrations. During these events, they were not only able to study the opulently decorated choreographics around the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church, who acts as a sufferer in the discipleship of Christ, but also the secondary characters of the mise en scène, journalists, bodyguards, and policemen. Dark suites also appear in the footage time and again, equipped with cameras and cell phones, small parks in the back, big wheel of a media point. The artist focus on the media apparatus of missionary work, on the structures of the representation of power and authority, and on the practices of the marketing and evangelization. Thereby, the alleged immediacy of the intimacy of suffering, which is communicated as a horizon of experience by the mass media, is broken up. Intimacy is the keywords for the next example. Liebes Wiedauer from Basel shows the now canonized Pope lost in his evening prayers. The blurring in the picture is not due to the low resolution, but to the fact that it is a stitch picture. After all, religious imagery has not only made the word of advertising subservient to its purposes due to the technologies and reproduction, it also leaked out into the images of everyday life, and thus gained the wide appeal that necessarily also transfers it into the world of kitsch and sacrificiality. But like in a picture puzzle, little mistakes slip into the concept of stitching these pictures, or, if we take her series literally, minor catastrophes. These pictures are not simply reproduction wallpaper, but stitching templates for women to occupy themselves creatively. After all, these popes' doctrines terminated the desire for gender equality within the Catholic Church, also with regard to priestly ordination, which became more and more urgent in those years. So this is how a feminist artist reacts. What could still be embroidered as a creative activity in the whole area, Liebeswiederer has already done in the small shift of the minor Agastophus. In Wiederer's picture of the Pope, the letter Nietzsche are stitched into the breviary's cover. As we all know, his diagnosis, God is dead, is what the churches and theologies have struggled with from the threshold of modernity right up to the present day. Nietzsche has become the symbolic term for what we call the dilemma of the modern age. He announced God's death on a bright morning, the wiping away of the whole horizon and the loosening of this earth from the sun by us. Can one immerse oneself in it or even pray to it? At any rate, the philosopher of God's death entered the very heart of what the administrators of religion have to deal with. The picture of Liebeswiederer is just one example of many how the people who was so omnipresent, how the Pope who was so omnipresent at the time was reflected in contemporary art. This example also makes it clear that staging is required. Henceforth, the papal photographer accompanied him everywhere he went, but only on his uncounted travels, but also in quite intimate moments of nocturnal studies for prayer, yes, even during his public time. In all his contradictionaries, the Polish Pope has claimed unprecedented media presence in his long pontificate. So he turned almost necessarily into a subject of art, but to a lesser extent in the sense of an excessive emergence of statues of the Pope in his native country, but rather in the ambivalent perception between worldwide presence, unrelenting resistance, and conservative resurgence. Pope John Paul II has already become the subject of international exhibitions as a media image was new. The best known work is La Nona Ora by Maurizio Cattelan, in which only a meteorite could have hit the rock, was even presented at the 29th Venice Biennale 20 years ago in 2001. Of course, this shifted the subject of the Christian image in the visual awareness of the public towards the dramatization of the proxy. So, it is no wonder that Pope John Paul II has not only become a subject of media theory, but also in artist terms, not only with Corpus Löffler, Wiederauer, or Maurizio Cattelan, but also with Uklansky or with the artist Martha Descour. She is a niece of Cardinal Descour, who was the closest advisor to Pope John Paul II. The Jan Babel Drugi series in 2007 about the floating Polish landscape. Benedict XVI, Beauty and Resignation, my sixth point. This did not continue this way, even though the first public images, right after the subsequent papal election, entered our memory again on a one-of-a-kind media message. Wir sind Papst, we are the Pope, was an ingenious but also hypocritical cover image of Germany's biggest tabloid on 20th of April 2005 that inscribed itself deep into our more recent pictorial memory. Even in 2011, when Benedict XVI visited his home country the third time, the Springer Publishing Company welcomed the Pope in Berlin by covering the entire high-rise building front of its headquarters with these words. But the message also signaled the dilemma. After all, the plebs were not quite as intellectual as the actual office holder, and such a degree of democratization could and should never be possible. Reversely, less and less could be said. The official portrait of the Pope was also the subject of much discussion in Germany. Its creator, the Leipzig painter Michael Triegel, became internationally known as a result. The Pope said to him, "You are my Raphael." Triegel belongs to the so-called Leipziger Schule, Leipzig School, which means something like away from the false paths of abstraction towards realism. This should persuade trailblazers such as Bishop Müller of Regensburg at that time to ask Triegel for a portrait. He painted. And then came the order for the paper portrait. But Michael Triegel was ideologically exploited. But he didn't allow himself to be exploited. In live sessions at audiences, he painted the Pope, but not as a star, with his hands raised against the blue background as his private secretary wanted. Benedict also wrote about art, as a chapter in Yvonne Donner's book describes in detail. Benedict XVI was theological as a pope. However, not only he wanted to convince with arguments, but also railed on the power of images and wanted to set an aesthetic corrective. Let's remember, after initial sobriety and clarity, the Pope's art, the Pope images dipped into a historicism. The unusual hats and the red Prada shoes were the subject on the pictorial side that has been discussed in the media. Thus, the photo of lightning striking the dome of St. Peter on the day of the Pope's resignation seemed like heaven's response. But was the image real, or on the contrary, digitally processed? But it was not just the portrait of the Pope Benedict became a topic of contemporary art. It was the shock of the Pope's resignation, which was the event artists were interested in. In conclusion, I would like to show you two examples. They come close to the level of that which applied to John Paul II. In his show in the Kunsthaus Graz, only a few months after Benedict had resigned, on 28th of February 2013, the African art star Romuald Hasumi reacted to the change of popes, but he introduced a crucial switch of perspectives away from the criticism of the mise en scene and towards the real global problems. The title of this work was called Rat Singers, a second to God. Rat Singers, a second to God. It was the English title whose German sound could not be blanked out through. It was under the spell of the global developments, cultural shifts, and humanitarian disasters, such as the tragedy of the refugees of Lampedusa. In the frame of the same exhibition, the artist also showed the beach of this island covered with dead fish, that were to symbolize the thousands upon thousands of refugees whose dead bodies were washed ashore. Moreover, a video piece was presented which showed how the renowned artist staged a fundraising campaign for the poor Westerners in his African native country of Benin. The tenor, to be sure, they have everything in the West, but no love. Azune spins the wheel of colonial history, but also of development aid, and reverses things, not help from us, but help for us. In the interview, Azune added the following: "The West has given us so much," he said. "No, now we must help the West because it is so sick. I have lived there for many years. I know what I am talking about." The installation we see here was a ship half sunken in a sea of faces. These faces were in fact gasoline cans, and each of them was individually designed. The ship named God Fire could also be interpreted as the collapse of the white culture. It was Benedict, the Pope of theologians, who tirelessly warned against the relativism of values in the Western world. The white canisters' heads were still clutching at what remained of the bow, a rat wearing sunglasses and reminding of the vacation trips of Europeans, but also at the cynicism of the regimes which, according to the artists, are in power until their leaders die or they were swept away by velvet or violent revolutions. Think of Egypt, Tunisia, Somalia, Eritrea, Syria, or are cemented in there. However, the rats leave the sinking ship first, as they say. But this song of the rats, rat singers, is one thing, the German sound is the other. According to the artists, the Pope should serve as a model for many African presidents. That is, they should give up their godlike status and resign. The image of the sinking ship was adjusted in the light of the global challenges. It was not merely the world violently shaken to and from anymore in which St. Peter's died. The ship was supposed to navigate it, on which the resigning Pope had spoken on Rose Monday 2013, that would need a younger helmsman's hand to solve the upcoming problems. It very quickly became the image of the ship of civilization in which the Church has and must have its humanizing share. The young helmsman was elected and soon visited him in Castel Gandolfo. The artist group Graham, which is particularly interested in media image, congenially reenacted the scene in which Francis welcomes Benedict. In the well-known reenactments, where the artist collective reenacts familiar images communicated by the media and thus point to their iconic visual strategies and potentials, the historical moment when Pope Francis visits and greets his predecessor Benedict XVI is an obvious subject like no other. Closeness and distance, friendliness and hug are explored in a reenacted scene which has never happened before in the history of papacy, an image that made history. And my last point today, Pope Francis and the desacralization of papacy. The public awareness of religion is determined by the mass media. The communication of religious messages by the mass media can also result in pictorial shifts of content that operate far away from the traditional regulations of the old religions that used a medium of writing. Thus, Smaller groups, too, have the opportunity to spread their ideas and they grasp it. The effortless storing of the message, for example, the video message, the rapid distribution and the wide, almost global reach, for example, television and the internet, formed the technological fundament for the return of religion into the public awareness. As the mass media constitute the public awareness, it is only logical that religion too returns more into the public awareness again, if it uses the mass media. This results is the valorization of the religious insights and messages of minorities too. Religions have always made use of the respectively new media, even though their structures are conservative, as long as they benefited from them. This also goes for the predominant religion, the Catholic Church. Pope Francis inaugurated a new area of media presence in 2013, which, for example, on the cover of the Rolling Stones magazine brought about so far unexploited media resources for the Pope. The first trip to the refugee island of Lampedusa in 2013, the prayer on empty St. Peter's Square when the corona pandemic broke out, 27th of March 2020, a mass in front of the communist prefabricated buildings in eastern Slovakia last year, the penance to the graves of abused and killed indigenous children this year are just a few of the images that will complicate the staging of the Pope, which has almost always been associated with major events since John Paul II. What is new in this respect? It draws its effect particularly from the de-dramatization of the office and from the Pope's authenticity. But the power of images also works, and in particular through this. But it works by means of some kind of anti-aestheticism. But the power of images also works, and precisely because of this, the desacralization of papacy, which was actually initiated by the Popes John the 23rd and Paul the 6th in the past century. Paul took off the tiara, for example, and which was particularly accented by the resignation of Benedict XVI, is being consistently continued by the latter's successor, whereby it is gaining reputation precisely through this. Yet, the unusually wide worldwide reception of the new style in the pontificate of Francis is not least supported by images. Anyway, what is new in the fact that the Church, to a lesser extent, presents itself as the subject of acerbic criticism, but rather often itself as an ally for a conception of art that is inseparably connected to criticism of society, time, and power. This constellation is fairly new, because so far it has rather been art where counter-images to the false god of the present, beyond benefit considerations and greed of the spirit of the time, could be found. And maybe this is the new beauty. So finally, I am coming to the end of my intervention. And finally, I want to change to the book which is presented in this evening, which was presented in this evening. The relationship between the Pope's life and the artistic form was one main strategy of Ivan Donner's book, Pope Art, together with the best thesis licentiated at the Faculty of History and Cultural Heritage of the Church of the Pontifical Gregorian University. followed and directed by Donna according to this vision. They dealt with the individual artistic phenomena in a specific historical, philosophical, and theological context that are exemplified in the various chapters with the concrete work of art, as she said in page 12. In according to this, I wanted to show some pieces of a curator's point of view in dealing with contemporary art. Mrs. Dorner shows 6 contributions which span the span of 5 pontificates from John the 23rd to Benedict the 16th, analyzing genre works of art. At the end of each contribution, there is an iconographic catalogue with a total of about 200 color images. The general bibliographic of each study are instead collected at the end on page 633 to 666, thus offering a useful general bibliography of the sector enriched by the index of names until page 678. Of the many merits of this encyclopedic volume, it is worth highlighting at least 3. First of all, the 6 contributions and the introductions are important materials offered to the scientific community and to lovers of the subject, both for the interest of the single topics and for the whole of the rich path. In fact, such qualified studies and contemporary Christian art are rare in Italian. Secondly, it is a question of both a new theoretical proposal combined with paths of its broad implementations, 6 studies, diversified and transdisciplinary. Finally, the courage to give shape to such a demanding volume is undoubtedly a significant intellectual and practical provocation launched to many interlocutors directly or indirectly involved in the proposed contents and the methods Ivan Donna used. So thank you for your listening to me, and once again, my apologizing that I'm not there in Rome. I would have loved it to be there, but it was not possible of private manners. Thank you.
Ringraziamo per questo articolato intervento e ora abbiamo il piacere di dare la parola finale alla professoressa Dona per ringraziare e complimenti agli autori del libro qui presenti. Non so se si possono mettere in piedi gli autori qui presenti, che possiamo così complimentare.
Vorrei esprimere il mio ringraziamento a tutti coloro che sono stati e sono coinvolti nel grande progetto Pope Art, un progetto che mi ha occupato fin da quando sono docente alla Gregoriana e che non ha perso il suo fascino per me fino ad oggi. Per primo voglio ringraziare chi ha inventato l'originale titolo Pope Art e Don Giulio Osto, ex allievo della Gregoriana e ora professore ordinario di teologia a Padua. Il mio ringraziamento va agli studenti della licenza in beni culturali della Chiesa negli anni 2016 a 2018, alcuni dei miei migliori. Così come Martina Maggioni, Helton Ferriari Rodriguez, Domenico Giuseppe Manuli, Renata Cardin, Giulia Licitra e Hansolgo, che hanno preso la licenza come un vero e proprio compito di ricerca e hanno investito un anno della ricerca, giungendo così a risultati completamente nuovi e talvolta anche con foto che non sono mai stati pubblicate. E hanno tutti in comune gli occhi nuovi, come ha detto padre Jim Coccari, come li chiamavano Guardini nella sua Katholischen Weltanschauung, questo sguardo triplice. lo sguardo di Cristo che cerca di vedere la vita, l'opera e il pensiero, la teoria delle singole figure, nel caso dei singoli papi, come un tutto. Il generoso giudizio dell'allora capo dei Domenicani a Roma, padre William Stefano Doci, con il quale avevo discusso molte opere sulla spiritualità dell'arte domenicana contemporanea e che purtroppo è fuori Roma e oggi non ha potuto venire. Da padre Jim Cochery, con il quale ho guidato la tesi di Hans Holgo, in un primo approccio interdisciplinare, tentando di vedere insieme teologia e teoria dell'arte. E grazie al suo aiuto abbiamo potuto sviluppare un approccio sempre più transdisciplinare, arrivando all'origine del pensiero quasi teologico sull'arte. Vorrei ringraziare anche il nostro allora vice rettore, oggi rettore della Gregoriana, che con la sua attivante apertura e allo stesso tempo con il suo sguardo gesuitico acuto ha completato lo sguardo integrale su questo tema. Vorrei ringraziare tutti voi, ma anche i relatori, certamente di oggi, come il già citato padre Jim Cochery, di nuovo veramente un accompagnatore io potrei dire, delle mie idee che mette un po' in ordine tutte queste diverse discipline. Marta Michelacci, che come artista e ricercatrice appartiene al movimento dei focolari, con quale ho collaborato al progetto La lotta di Giacobbe nella Kunststation Köln dei Gesuiti a Bologna, fino al percorso insieme con Piero Coda alla Sophia University. And thanks to Johannes Rauchenberger, who, as a pupil of our dear colleague and friend, Professor Alex Stock, is a profound and fascinating expert, very provocative, on the contemporary dimension of art. So, delicately casts a look from the outside on the situation in Rome. We could say as a kind of footnote to my book. Sono grata che così tante persone veramente diverse, su diversi livelli, proprio anche diverse discipline, siano riunite qui e siano state in grado di esaminare questo argomento insieme, in pace. E così vorrei anche ringraziare a due decani, io devo dire, padre Nuno Gonsalves, non solo decano ma anche rettore, che era rettore, e il nostro decano padre Inglot, che hanno sempre avuto un interesse per questo tema. Ma voglio anche ringraziare i due direttori del Dipartimento, professore Ottavio Buccarelli, e soprattutto per la splendida moderazione di Don Roberto Regoli, un vero esperto proprio della storia contemporanea della Chiesa. Un evento così ben preparato da Maria Toribolo e Roberto Filippi, ringrazio tanto, e un grazie di cuore a Giovanna Ilaria di GB Press, che si è occupata dell'ampio lavoro editoriale. In particolare vorrei concludere con un ringraziamento speciale a padre Miquel Koll, che per la sua visione critica, teologica e storica dell'intera opera, e Caterina e Virginia Tessicini per la felice e importante collaborazione editoriale. E per ultima, ma non meno importante, ringrazio alla mia famiglia che mi ha sostenuto così amorevole, e alla fine veramente grazie a voi, tutti voi che siete qui stasera con noi. Grazie mille.